just got done watching Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse, one of my most anticipated films for all of 2023, and particularly probably the film that I was most nervous about going into, and primarily that is because the first Spider-Verse film is my favorite Spider-Man movie, as well as my favorite comic book movie of all time. When I watched that first Spider-Verse movie, I was completely blown away, and coming out of this movie, I felt the exact same way, and like I mentioned, the first film was my favorite comic book movie of all time until I saw this film. This film absolutely left me on the floor. It left me speechless, and it left me going like this.
First you were all like, whoa, and then we were all like, whoa, and then you were like, whoa.
To steal something that my fiance said, but she said, call me Floor because I'm on the floor after watching Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse. This movie left me speechless, and honestly, one of the things that it actually made me feel was the same feeling that I had when I first went to the movies when I was a kid. And I have not felt that in forever. The first movie I ever saw in the movie theaters was Toy Story 2. That movie was absolutely great. I love that film, and it was my favorite animated sequel until I'd seen this film. And for me, primarily, the first Toy Story is still my favorite animated film, but I always have this core memory of popping in the VHS when I was younger and watching it and being completely mystified and taken back by that movie. And feeling that movie magic. And I feel like every once in a while, like, I can walk out of the movie and be like, that was perfect. That was a masterpiece. That was exactly what it needed to be in its own genre. And I've watched out of movies and been like, that is why I love going to the movies. And you may call this a recency bias. You may be like, Zach, you hype a lot of movies up. I do. But very rarely do I get deeply this emotional walking out of the film. Where I'm so speechless walking out and talking to the rep that, again, it made me feel like a kid. And it made me look forward to when I have kids, that I can show my child this movie. And this will probably end up being one of their favorite movies of all time, if not their favorite film for the rest of their life. And I can only imagine that kids will feel that way when watching this, as well as adults. Within the first 20 minutes, I was absolutely blown away by this movie, and I have so much to say. And again, this will be a non-spoiler review. You are safe here. I'm going to stay pretty vague when it comes down to the story, plot points, and specifically a lot of the cameos that you see in here. And I have to say, if you do love talking movies and you are a movie fanatic, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button because we are on our goal to hit 50,000 subs this year, and it would mean the world because I think we can do it. And if you're just as passionate about movies as I am, then you are certainly in the right place. Make sure to leave your thoughts down below on what your thoughts are on the first film, what your thoughts are on this one as well. So, with that said, Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse is about Miles Morales, who's catapulted across the multiverse where he encounters a team of spider people who are charged with protecting its very existence. When the heroes clash on how to handle a new threat, Miles must redefine what it means to be a hero. Now, when this movie was first announced, it was very much announced as a direct sequel to the first film, but one of the biggest surprises that came was that this was actually going to be a part 1 to a part 2, and that we are getting part 2 of this film next year, next March. So thankfully, we don't have to wait too long. I do want to give that warning though, because my fiance did not know that this was a part 1 going into this. So when it does end, you're kind of like, whoa! But it makes you so eager to see the next one. And it genuinely is probably one of my favorite endings to a movie I've ever seen. I think primarily sticks out like the Empire Strikes Back's ending, which I think is one of the best endings that you could possibly ever have leading in and building up that anticipation for the next film. I think other than just talking about that specific ending and what this film does, is that while it does feel very much like a part 1, the film itself does deal in its own story and its own character arcs and building of ideologies. We see a lot of ideology battles within comic book movies, primarily whether it's The Watchmen, Civil War, or you can even look at The Dark Knight and Avengers Infinity War. But when we do watch a lot of those movies and we see battling of ideologies between heroes and villains, it's very rare where we see two heroes have two different ideologies, and where that comes from, and specifically the terminology and the exposition that it decides to delve into that. Now, I know a lot of people will probably point to Civil War between Iron Man and Captain America. For me, though, I'm not the greatest fan of that film. I really like it, but I always found that their ideologies never hit into the dramatic matter that really carried a lot of heavy stakes. Now, the film's awesome in a lot of different ways as well, but what I really love about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is the way that it actually did deal with those ideologies, and the way that specifically you start to learn about what is going on with the Spider Society, and primarily what Spider-Man 2099 has up his sleeve. And I actually really like when it starts to dive into a lot of how Miles maybe is very young, but he is very intelligent. And when he starts to see what is kind of actually going on in this full picture and realm, and what his situation actually is, it hits and tugs at the heartstrings. Because this is the movie that really much reflects towards anyone who ever has been called a mistake, or has ever themselves felt like a mistake in this world, where they feel like they're always disappointing other people, never able to satisfy all of them. That for me is a big area of self-consciousness that a lot of us deal with on a daily basis. I know I do. I deal with depression. I deal with issues like this where I am so self-conscious on anything that I do that I'm always wanting to impress the next person, that I'm always wanting to prove my worth, and I'm always wanting to not feel like a mistake. And in this film, you see where Miles is kind of coming from. While he has this slick and amazing style to himself, deep down, he's got a lot of self-conscious issues. And I like that the movie touches on that. And I like that it builds up, again, a battle of ideologies and a deep awakening with that, with all these different spider people and where all their different thoughts are, and in general, what connects each and every one of them. And it makes it fascinating the way that they play on the origin stories, how they kind of did in the first film and kind of the humor of that. They actually delve deeper into the emotional avenue of that. What made them become the spider people? What made them become that hero? What happens if that doesn't happen? It's all those things that connect, and the film is brilliantly told in a way of that manner. And actually, when it comes down to time itself and the multiverse, this is something that, like, I feel like Christopher Nolan would do if he had created an animated movie and had the visualization that the Spiderverse is able to really much craft and create. And a lot of that all goes down to the directors and the writers on board. Directors Joaquin Santos, Kemp Powers, Justin Thomas, and then the writers Phil Lord and Christopher Miller and David Callum. You can see that all of their ideas come and flesh together in such, again, a perfect manner. This is, again, a film that works on every level. And the fact that you can make exposition heart-wrenching and emotional, but at the same time completely interesting to where you want to hear every line of dialogue, is incredible. As well as a ton of the Easter eggs. When we go into films like this, do they use Easter eggs for nostalgic purposes? Yes. But do they also use a ton of them on ways that make sense for the sense of the story? Absolutely. And I went into this movie kind of being spoiled on a lot, but I walked out still being surprised by a lot. And that's why I'm trying to be very vague, because there is so much depth in this movie, and specifically what they are able to do with every single one of the characters and their backstories. I think, again, the directors and writers all need to be acclaimed for the story that they were able to tell here, as well as the animation. That first film had such unique animation that really much has started a juggernaut of other animated films now copying this, whether it's Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, which I really liked, Intergalactic on Netflix, and as well as the brand new Disney film Wish coming out later this year that kind of has that sense of style. But this movie, if you thought the first movie was incredible in its animation department, this is even better. All the different spider worlds you go to, insane. All the different spider people and the animation on them is incredible. My jaw was on the floor. This is hyperbole. This is one of the greatest movies ever made. Not just in the animated form, in general. My mind continued to be blown. And I just kept finding my jaw on the floor at every single second. And again, it all just comes together and pieces together perfectly. Now, while we have all of this to look at, again, the animation is just jaw-dropping. There's so many sequences that I literally want to go through and pause at every second of this frame and look at all the little details, because there's so many different details in every single one of the sequences, and primarily a lot of the action set pieces. the whole spider chase sequence literally had my jaw on the floor. And I was trying so hard not to cry. And Spider-Man 2099? Oh, perfect. Jessica Drew, awesome. Miles Morales, the heart of everything. Shameik Moore, this is so good as Miles. And there's this great length that really discusses about family. And again, like I mentioned, about feeling like a mistake and wanting to really much prove your self-worth. And I love what Moore was able to give to this character and what they set up for Miles by the end of this movie. I can't wait to see what Moore does in the next film. Haley Steinfeld as Gwen Stacy. I already loved her in the first movie, but she gets a lot of added depth. She is very much the secondary character of this film. And in fact, no spoilers, but the first 20 minutes is a great cold opening. Not cold opening, but it's a great opening. This entire film, as it dives back into Gwen Stacy's story and really gives us not just an amazing action sequence, but really much a better understanding of her than just the rushed introduction that they gave us into the first movie. And Steinfeld kills it. She's so good in this movie. I've always been worried about when actors and actresses who aren't really much trained voice professions actually jump into that medium. I always get worried that their voices are going to be like kind of distracting. They're like, oh, I know who that is. I know who that is. Steinfeld and Moore are absolutely these characters. Oscar Isaac, same thing. You forget that he's even playing Spider-Man 2099 because of the grit and the depth that he gives this character. I absolutely love the design of 2099. He is so badass, and I can't wait to see more of him, whatever they do with next with this character, because again, it's just awesome. And if there's ever a possibility of Isaac becoming a live action version of this character, count me in. Along the likes, of course, we know that Jake Johnson's returning. He's great as Peter B. Parker. Issa Rae as Jessica Drew is great. Let me say this, though. Daniel Kaluuya as Spider-Punk is a huge standout. And primarily, I love how Daniel Kaluuya actually voiced him, but I really actually love the design of Spider-Punk in here, and I need, like, the coolest, biggest action figure of him because the way that he was used was great. Aaron Sony as Spider-Man India was also a great little standout as well. And the likes of Brian Tyree Henry and Luna Velvez as Miles' parents. Again, phenomenal. You really do feel that emotion in there. And last but not least, I've been holding this one in. Jason Schwartzman, who plays, oh god, the Spot, which I thought could have been one of the dumbest villains. And they do make that joke. They make it very self-aware. But what they actually do with the Spot is actually very fascinating. And all the different theories you're going to have, like leading into where the ending of this film takes you and all the different openings and different kind of storylines that are left open, there's going to be a lot surrounding this one character's powers that are just, again, fascinating. And I loved it. Shout out to Scarlet Spider as well, voiced by Andy Samberg in here. I was so happy they finally announced that. Scarlet Spider is one of my favorite spider suits of all time, and it was great. I love how they used him. Well, I've talked a lot about all the main pieces that really do formulate to make this film so amazing. The other thing I cannot count out is, of course, Daniel Pepperton's music in here. Now, this is, of course, the score that he's composed. It is absolutely drum beating. It is fantastic. Every single moment, it just powers on through. And the soundtrack here as well is, while I don't think there's like a memorable song like Sunflower like the first one had, it didn't need to make a song like that because every musical moment in here feels perfect for the sequence that it is in. I just still continue to find myself just completely enamored by this movie. I find myself completely emotional with this film. And I completely find myself just going back and like realizing like this is what movies are all about. It's about experiencing something collective with an audience that I feel like nowadays we just still don't get. And movies strike every person so differently. But for a film this great to come out, it is so good to say that. It's so good to say that Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse is truly a phenomenal masterpiece. Again, it's not just the best Spider-Man movie of all time. It's not just the best comic book film of all time. It's not just the greatest sequel ever made. It's bar none one of the best films I've ever watched. More than a masterpiece. This is everything. The feeling this film gave me brought back the same feeling I had when I watched my first movie ever. My main core memory of Toy Story being watched for the very first time. And if you've watched my channel for a while, you know how much I love Toy Story. That's my favorite movie of all time. I'm in tears about this film, guys. Go on and on and on. Oh my god, this is flat out one of the greatest films I've ever seen. I find myself speechless and rambling at this point. Go see the movie. Get tickets. Take whoever. And even if you are someone who's over the Spider-Man world or just in general comic book movies, this is a movie that will remind you why you love going to the movies. And this is, again, one of the greatest movies ever made in the history of cinema. This is art. And if this film is as good as this is, I have all the hope in the world that the third film will be possibly just as good, if not better. And we'll be coming back to this conversation of what is the greatest comic book film of all time? What is one of the greatest films of all time? And I will definitively say, if the next film is just as good, if not better, this is the greatest trilogy of all time. Of all time. And I know I just got done talking about Guardians of the Galaxy being one of the best. And for me, that is my favorite comic book film trilogy. This will surpass it by miles. No pun intended, I just got that. This, hands down, will beat out any other trilogy I've ever watched before. So, with that said, guys, thank you so much again for watching this. And I'm going to give Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse an A+. Thank you so much again, guys, for watching this. Make sure to, again, hit that like and subscribe and look forward to a ton of Spider-Man content. We're going to definitely be doing a Spider-Man ranking later this week. I also might be doing a video talking about my favorite Spider-Men and just in general the cameos that I got to see in here. Maybe ranking some of my favorites as well. I don't know. Let me know down below what you guys want to see. And, of course, until next time, stay classy.